Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting of the Assembly Committee on Judiciary to order. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Here.
Assemblywoman Cohen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hanson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hardy.
Here.
Assemblywoman Kasama.
Here.
Assemblywoman Krasner. Assemblywoman Marzola.
Here.
Assemblyman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Nguyen.
Here.
Assemblyman O'Neill.
Here.
Assemblyman Orentlicker.
Here.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Here.
Assemblyman Wheeler.
Here.
Chairman Yeager.
Here. We do have a quorum. I believe Assemblywoman Krasner has not yet joined us, so please mark her absent for the time being, and if and when she arrives, we will mark her as present. Good morning to the members of the committee. Good morning to members of the public who may be watching this meeting online or on the YouTube channel. I want to welcome you to day 31 of the 81st session of the Nevada Legislature. We are glad to have you with us. Before we get started on today's agenda, just go over a few housekeeping matters for members on the Zoom and presenters who may be on the Zoom with us as well. Please make sure you mute yourself when you're not speaking. That'll help with the audio feedback. And for presenters, anytime you speak or you're asked a question, if you could please remember to state your name, that'll help our committee secretary prepare the minutes. We do expect courtesy and respect in our interactions with one another. We don't always agree, that's perfectly fine, but we need to make sure we're being respectful of one another and of the legislative institution. And then finally, many members have multiple devices and screens in front of them, so please don't see it as a sign of disrespect or inattention if members appear to be looking away during the meeting. They're most likely looking at exhibits or testimony online. So with that behind us, we'll go to our agenda, and just so everyone has a lay of the land here, we're going to take the bills slightly out of order. So we'll start with Assembly Bill 149, and then we're going to go to Assembly Bill 158 and finish with 157. So we're going to swap the second and third bill on the agenda in terms of order. I would note for the record as well that Assemblywoman Krasner has joined us. So Madam Secretary, please mark her as present. And at this time, I'm going to open up the hearing on Assembly Bill 149. Assembly Bill 149 enacts provisions relating to cannabis independent testing laboratories. I'll let members of the committee and members of the public know that there is an amendment that you should be able to find on Nellis that makes some pretty substantial changes to the original bill. So I imagine we'll probably be working off of that amendment this morning. And then I want to welcome back to the Assembly Judiciary Committee Assemblywoman Peters. We miss you on the committee, and we're glad that you're here to present this morning. And I believe joining her is Mr. Will Adler, and then I believe we may have individuals from the Cannabis Compliance Board who may be presenting testimony or may just be here to answer questions. So Assemblywoman Peters, welcome back to the committee, and please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you for the warm welcome, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for hearing AB 149 today, related to cannabis industry laboratory data, public transparency and reporting. I want to bring your attention to the submitted draft proposed amendment, as this is what we'll be speaking to today. The purpose of AB 149 is to increase transparency for consumers of cannabis products in Nevada. The Cannabis Compliance Board has the authority to develop and publish data collected via the Seed to Sale program known as Metric. Laboratory data is one of the most important subsets of data available through the Metrics program. Laboratory data tells us the level of THC in each batch of tested product, as well as any potential contaminants such as mold or toxins, and is used to ensure consumer safety. Since the inception of the medical and recreational use regulations, the respective regulatory and compliance agencies have set standards for consumer cannabis products, which are verified through licensed independent laboratories. The results of these laboratory tests are available upon request by the consumer. However, there is no way to receive a complete data set of laboratory analysis of products from producers that is readily available and accessible by the public. You all know I love data. I am a data nerd and can take raw data and make it statistically significant, run trend analysis, and describe those things in a report. I do also realize that raw data is the most important information if it is analyzed appropriately. I also realize that my ability to do this is a specialization of my lifetime in science, and that these data results and trends should be readily accessible to the public for the sake of transparency and accountability necessitated by the privileged nature of this industry. I believe in this body that we are just starting to scratch the surface of the value of data and the stories it can tell us. In this industry, accessing the data can safeguard consumers from inadvertently consuming product that they may not want to consume. It can also tell stories about producer practices such as shopping for results, and inconsistencies in laboratory results can expose dangerous practices of analytical manipulation that put the public in potential harm. In the amendment, Section 2 is omitted based on the regulatory authority of the Cannabis Compliance Board and the legal nature of debt collection. Section 3 is modified, proposing a database be developed that contain all laboratory information related to cannabis products sold in the state of Nevada. The amendment revises this section to ensure that the database of laboratory data is available to the public in a readily accessible format, and requires that a biannual report be submitted to the legislature describing the laboratory data and any pertinent analysis that was conducted on the data and how it was used by the Cannabis Compliance Board or the public. I have Will Adler on as well to talk a little bit about the laboratory side of why this is so important.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Peters. Mr. Adler, welcome back to the Assembly Judiciary Committee. I think this is the first time we've had you here this session. It's good to see you, and please proceed with your remarks.
Thank you. Will Adler, representing Silver State Government Relations, representing Sierra Cannabis, or representing the Scientists for Consumer Safety today. And thank you, Chair Yeager. And it is a pleasure and an honor to be back in front of your committee, the Assembly Judiciary. Assembly Bill 149, as Assemblywoman Peters so eloquently put, needs a full rewrite basically in this amendment, but in a good way. We decided with the CCB that first Section 2 was not going to be in the interest of the CCB to do, because they are not a judiciary body, nor are they a civil court. So we did, have some back and forth with the CCB about that. And we came to understanding that the core of this issue is getting the data and getting it to the public in some way that, uses the data that Nevada already pays for. Scientists for Consumer Safety is the laboratory-based cannabis testing group. And essentially in our whole scope and in the name of our group is trying to keep the consumers safe in Nevada. So anything we can do to promote the transparency of the data and the tests done on the cannabis is something we support. So we thank Assemblywoman Peters for bringing this forward, and we hope you all have a good rest of the judiciary and ask any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. Assemblywoman Peters, would you like anyone else to provide comments, or are you ready for questions?
I believe that the Cannabis Compliance Board is here to answer any questions specific to their activities related to this bill. So I am open to questions. Sorry, Sarah Peters for the record.
Great. Thank you so much for the presentation. Before I go to members, I guess one question that I had, I'm not sure if it would be best addressed by you or by the Cannabis Compliance Board, but I just wondered if there's some more detail about what this, I know this bill hasn't passed yet, but if there was a vision about what this electronic database, would sort of look like, where it would be housed, is it going to be accessible on the internet, just those kind of details to the extent we might have them at this point.
Well, I have an idea of what I would like to see it look like based on what is usable for me in the scope of the work that I do in my professional life. But I actually am going to divert this question. Sorry, Assemblywoman Peters for the record. Divert the question to the Cannabis Compliance Board if they wouldn't mind responding about what it looks like.
Sure, thank you. Oh, Chair, if it's all right to go.
Go ahead, Mr. Klimas. I have a lot of people on my screen today, and I was trying to figure out which square you were in. So I see you now, and please go ahead with the answer to the question.
Sure, thank you, Chair. And Tyler Klimas, for the record, and thank you, Assemblywoman. So if this bill was to go forward and the board was to develop a database, obviously, probably the ideal spot would be on the Cannabis Compliance Board website. We currently have a statistics page. We have a lot of other data, including owner, officer, board member information on our website. So, you know, I would assume that would be an ideal place for this database to be housed.
Thank you, Director Klimas. I have a question next from Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Hello, thank you so much for the presentation. Good morning. Assemblywoman Gonzalez, District 16 for the record. I was wondering if lab fraud is still an issue in the state and if the data for that was published or still needs to be published.
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Peters, for the record. There has been actually some recent activity related to this, and I would again request that the Cannabis Compliance Board speak a little bit to the most recent activities related to laboratory fraud.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tyler Klimas, for the record, and Assemblywoman, thanks for your question. I think actually at the beginning of February when I was in front of this board, I believe I said if I could have a laboratory division within the Cannabis Compliance Board, I would, and hopefully I do at some point. So yes, we know that there are issues with labs. We have just finished a 14-month investigation into a lab. You know, a lot of our actions have been very public because a lot of them have to do with public health and safety advisories that we issue. So, you know, I believe we're making progress. There's a lot of progress to be made. We've got a lot of great inspectors on our team. Hopefully we get to build out that team. So yeah, it's a major component of this industry. We consider laboratories the gatekeeper of the industry. Obviously integral for keeping consumers in Nevada safe with the product. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Peters, if I may, I just want to emphasize the importance of the value of the data that comes out of our laboratories. And if it's not held in the kind of integrity that it should be, the potential for harm can be so great. There's a lot of power wielded in that data. And it's important that the public, as well as regulators, be allowed to hold those data to the highest standard of accuracy and applicability to the industry.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I have some additional questions. So I'll go to Assemblyman O'Neill, and then we'll go to Assemblywoman Hanson. Assemblyman O'Neill, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And probably, Mr. Klimas, question for you. If you said that the labs are the gatekeepers of the industry, and if that's true, I was recently reading an article from the Las Vegas Review Journal about how the labs really are operating without any controls or supervision of them. You've got one, Canix, I think it's called, Canix, Nevada, that's been, their license has been suspended. They've got multiple violations now, and they're still operating. So if the gatekeeper isn't being supervised, what happens to the rest of the program?
Sure, thank you, Assemblyman and Tyler Klimas, for the record. And you're right, as I mentioned, they are the gatekeepers, which is why it's so important that they are regulated and that we have, enforcement capability and we move forward with enforcement actions on labs. And as I mentioned, and as you can imagine, Assemblyman, these inspections and investigations are unlike other establishments because they're so complicated, right? Because we're dealing with operating procedures and it's very scientific. And why, as I mentioned, we just took action against a lab, and it took 14 months to complete that investigation. You know, we're talking about 6,000 documents as part of that. So so again, if I could have a lab division, I would, and that doesn't help us or answer your question any better. But I'm just saying, you're absolutely right. It's an issue that's top of mind for the agency. We do have a great small team of 3 lab inspectors, but they are very technical, and they're very, some of the best, I think, in the nation. But, we use data to look at trends in the industry, especially with labs, and there's issues like THC inflation. There is lab shopping and passing product when it should fail. So it's a very serious issue. We take it very seriously. And again, it's highly technical. That's the nature of the labs. And so, hopefully we continue to expand as the CCB on that aspect of the industry.
I may also interject, Assemblywoman Peters, for the record. One of the capacity building components of this database would be to automate some of that technical analysis that's done currently by individuals of the Cannabis Compliance Board. So you can run an algorithm that will do an automated statistical analysis to identify anomalies that will allow proactively the Cannabis Compliance Board to identify potential failures in the laboratory analysis process. That's a huge advantage for a small entity who may not have the capacity to address all of the data that is available, which is a huge quantity of data, by the way. So I think ultimately the adoption and development of this is such a strategic tool for the Cannabis Compliance Board to be on top of their compliance efforts for the laboratories.
Mr. Chair, if I can continue, or
Please go ahead.
it probably won't be a question. I'm going to make a statement. Ms. Peters, I agree with you. I think collecting the data, having the data public, being able to run, as you say, the algorithms that give you indications, I'm all for it. I believe in strong supervision, and when the legislature passed the cannabis laws, they said how they were going to be the premier of the country, strong enforcement. Mr. Klamas, I'm going to tell you, shut a couple of those labs down, take their license, close them, and you'll see the rest of them starting to comply with you much better. And with that, thank you, Chair, for giving me the time.
Thank you, Assemblyman. We'll go next to Assemblywoman Hanson.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Assemblywoman Peters. It's good to see you, and Mr. Klimas. Actually, I think most of my questions were answered in the last segment, but just a couple more things. So to clarify with the amendment, Section 3 is essentially what the bill will be now. Is that correct?
Assemblywoman Peters, that is correct.
And then the CCB is the one who regulates the laboratories. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then the last thing, as you can tell, I'm just trying to clarify to make sure I'm getting it all straight. With the bill, you're looking to use the data in this database to accomplish several things, but could you maybe give us a real life scenario that might exist right now that you would be able to, if this bill were to pass, what would it address, in the sense that what's a current problem we have right now that now the database will provide that information to the public? I understand that part, but maybe tell us, what are we going to see if we go to that website go to the CCB website and access the database? For lay people looking into it, what are we going to be able to understand now that you're able to address that maybe we aren't now?
Assemblywoman Peters, for the record, thank you for that clarifying question. I think it's really important to understand how public access to data can be used to keep ourselves safe. I think one of the examples I'm going to suggest is if you look at nutrition fact information on our food products, right? That helps us understand what it is that we're consuming. Similarly, having access to the analytical data of cannabis products will give us an idea of what it is that we're consuming. Additionally, for folks who are more interested in maybe the regulatory side or the laboratory analytical side, they could look up maybe trends in the THC amounts in the products that they're consuming. So they could pull the data in different ways, either from the producer or from that specific product, just depending on how the build out goes, and look at how the THC concentrations have changed. You could also pull any analysis that was done on a specific product batch, which could be from a couple of different entities, and see if those entities have shown different concentrations, in which case that self-polices the producers and allows the public to kind of call out inconsistencies in laboratory analysis. I think that's more of a tool for the Cannabis Compliance Board, but for people who are interested, and there are quite a few like kind of novice data interested people in the cannabis world, I think it's an important piece to be able to see. It additionally holds laboratories and producers accountable for their products, right? If they're saying that a cannabis product has so much THC in it or so much other compounds in it, I'm sorry, THC is just the one that I can remember off the top of my head. They can look to ensure that there's consistency in those batches and that there's not the potential for manipulation of that data or inconsistencies in what they're consuming. I think that piece is particularly important for folks who are using cannabis for medical treatment, right? Because you want to see some consistency in what you're ingesting for those treatment needs.
If I may.
Just a quick little follow-up to what was just said.
Assemblywoman Hanson, can I think Mr. Adler wanted to add something, so let's allow him to add his comment and then we'll go back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Assemblywoman Hanson. Will Adler, representing Scientists for Consumer Safety, for the record. Briefly, a real-time example of that and a data bank usefulness for having this data in a published format. Metric is a seed-to-sale tracking data bank that already exists that we already see our own data for. So if you're a cultivator, you're a lab, or you're a dispensary, any one piece of that group, or if you own all three pieces, you can own the lab, you can see that everything that you've done in Metric and all your own data. As a laboratory, we can see every test that we've done for all of our customers. But a real-time example of where this would be useful is new customers do come in frequently, and they come in with some expectations sometimes, and they do represent themselves as the cleanest cultivator ever, coming to you as a new lab just to have new business. Sometimes that cultivator's actually been failing continuously for the last 3 months, every product they've tried to test, but they'll go to a new lab and say, hey, I'm a clean cultivator, please take me as a new test. And we start failing them, it ends up becoming this conflict where they say, hey, it's got to be something wrong with you guys, not us, because we're a clean cultivator. But if we could see the historic data and actually pull up some sort of indication of where they were historically, we could sort of defend ourselves in our practice and say, hey, the science is sound. It might be the historic data that we're seeing here has continued with these tests today.
Thank you. That was very helpful. And then just one last little thing, because I haven't purchased any recently, but is there not an informational sticker on the products when you buy them to tell you what's in it? Because I know that you mentioned to Assemblywoman Peters that you can go to the website and check what the ingredients are, but don't they have that already on the products?
Assemblywoman Peters, for the record, yes, they do already have that on the product.
Okay, are there other questions? If you could raise your hand. I don't know that I have all of you on the same screen, but I'm trying to navigate this to see if we have questions. I'm not seeing any hands raised, but I'll give it another second just in case I'm missing somebody. Okay, I don't think I see additional questions. So Assemblywoman Peters, Mr. Adler, appreciate you presenting. If you could stand by for a moment and we'll take some testimony and then we'll come back to you for any wrap up or concluding remarks on the bill. So at this time, I'm going to open it up for testimony in support of Assembly Bill 149. I don't know if we have anyone on the Zoom who would like to testify in support. If so, if you could unmute and simply indicate that you'd like to testify in support, that would be helpful. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone on the Zoom. BPS, could we go to the phone line to see if there's anybody there who would like to offer supportive testimony for Assembly Bill 149?
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. For callers wishing to provide testimony in support of Assembly Bill 149, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. And we will begin with caller with the last 3 digits of 812. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good morning. My name is Bruce Burnett, B-U-R-N-E-T-T. I'm a retired physician and co-founder, co-owner of Ace Analytical Laboratory in Las Vegas. I wish to thank Chairman Yeager and the committee members for allowing me the opportunity to comment in support of AB 149. I believe data transparency will benefit the cannabis laboratory, the consumers, and the state. The intent of the bill is simple and straightforward, and I believe will be successful in its intent, which is to foster responsible behavior in Nevada's cannabis industry. Metric, the seed-to-sale tracking software mandated by the state, already contains all of the necessary data. Making this data public in a searchable database will allow any fraud to be ferreted out. Since the inception of Nevada's cannabis program, there have been numerous news reports locally and nationally of significant fraudulent results associated with lab testing in Nevada. A number of these have resulted in product recalls and charges leveled against the offending laboratories. Several laboratories have had their licenses suspended more than once after being charged by the state with serious violations, including producing fraudulent test results. It is an open secret in the cannabis industry that certain laboratories will provide inflated THC levels and passing results to failing products for certain consumers and cultivators and producers. This unscrupulous behavior has gone on far too long and must be stopped. It endangers and defrauds the consumer and makes a mockery of the hard work the legislature has done in crafting the program in Nevada. Nevada's cannabis testing program should and can be the gold standard of the industry. What is necessary to accomplish this is appropriate enforcement. The key to enforcement is knowing who is violating the law. As was stated so eloquently earlier, prior statistical analysis of the testing data clearly identified a lab that has recently been charged with over 12,000 violations and is still open today. Other laboratories were statistically clustered next to that laboratory that has been charged and likewise warrants serious scrutiny. The metric database already exists and simply needs to be made available for statistical analysis. Making the historic metric data available with continuous updates is all that is needed. Members of the industry, interested reporters, and the interested consuming public will readily and at no cost to the state perform the analysis, which the state can verify and then use to target their investigations. This will allow the state to focus their precious time and human resources where it's needed to clean up the industry and achieve the integrity envisioned by the legislators when they enacted the Nevada Adult Use Cannabis Program. We wholeheartedly support AB 149 and ask for the committee's support. We believe it will be an extremely efficient and effective method of achieving major improvements in the integrity and safety of Nevada's cannabis industry. Honest and efficient laboratories, cultivators, and producers will benefit while providing the consumer with safe, accurately labeled cannabis. This is essential for the long-term success of Nevada's cannabis program. Again, I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak today, and I thank you in advance for your support of this essential piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Burnett. BPS, is there anybody else who'd like to give supportive testimony?
Yes, for any callers wishing to provide testimony in support for Assembly Bill 149, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no further callers wishing to provide testimony in support.
Thank you, BPS. I will close testimony in support. I will now open testimony in opposition. I don't believe we have anyone on the Zoom with us in opposition. BPS, could we check the phone line to see if there's anybody there?
Yes, thank you. For callers wishing to testify in opposition of Assembly Bill 149, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Any callers wishing to testify in opposition of Assembly Bill 149, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. And Chair, we do not have any callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you, BPS. I will close opposition testimony. I will now open neutral testimony. Is there anybody on the Zoom that would like to testify in neutral? If so, please unmute and let me know. I'm not seeing anybody unmuting on the Zoom. BPS, could we go to the phone to see if there's anyone there with neutral testimony?
Yes, thank you, Chair. For callers wishing to testify in neutral of Assembly Bill 149, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Callers wishing to provide testimony in neutral of Assembly Bill 149, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Thank you, BPS. I will close neutral testimony and I will give Assemblywoman Peters and Mr. Adler a chance to make any concluding remarks on Assembly Bill 149.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Sarah Peters, for the record. I just really want to thank the committee for considering this piece of legislation and for entertaining an understanding that this data and its value is so imperative to the success of the cannabis industry and market and for the safety of consumers. So thank you so much for your time today, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any additional questions.
Mr. Adler, would you like to make any concluding remarks?
No, just thank you for the time, and I appreciate you hearing this bill today.
I thank you to the two of you for presenting, and thank you to the Cannabis Compliance Board for being here to answer questions as well. I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I'm sure we'll see you back in the committee soon. I will now close the hearing on Assembly Bill 149, and I'm now going to go to our third bill on the agenda. I will open the hearing on Assembly Bill 158. Assembly Bill 158 revises the penalties for certain offenses involving alcohol or cannabis. For members of the committee and members of the public, I will alert you that there are, I believe, 2 amendments to the bill on Nellis that I think sort of overlay one on top of the other. So I believe we'll be working off of those in some fashion today. And I want to welcome to the committee our own Assemblywoman, Danielle Monroe Moreno, and she is joined by a few others who are on the Zoom with us as well. I'm going to give them a chance to present the bill, and Assemblywoman, I'll let you determine what order you would like to go in as far as presentation, and then when we have the presentation finished, I'm sure we'll have some questions, and then we'll go to testimony. So welcome to all of you who are joining us for Assembly Bill 158. Assemblywoman, please proceed when you're ready.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I am Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Moreno, representing Assembly District 1. I'm here today to present for your consideration Assembly Bill 158, which addresses the penalties for youth cannabis and alcohol purchase, consumption, and possession. I bring this bill to you at the request of a community member and an activist who, as I, have seen far too many young people, especially Black and Brown youth in our communities, receiving a criminal record long before they even get their first job. On November 8th, 2016, Nevada residents voted and passed Question 2 on a ballot making recreational marijuana legal up to 1 ounce, officially legal for persons 21 years and older, and medical marijuana legal for persons 18 years and older. As a legislative body, we have worked hard to create legislation to reflect the changes in our laws following the passing of Question 2 as it pertains to adults. However, for our youth, our statutes have not yet changed. Currently, those found in possession of 1 ounce or less of marijuana or in possession of alcohol remains a possible criminal misdemeanor offense, which is punishable by imprisonment for not more than 6 months or by a fine of no more than $1,000 or both. It is the bill requesters and the sponsor's intent to revise the penalties for these offenses such that would provide graduated penalties targeted to address the conduct while ensuring that we are not interjecting children into the criminal justice system cycle. The language of AB 158 as introduced did not meet the original intent that we had hoped. There has been a collective effort to make the necessary language corrections, and I would like to thank the bill requester, the Public Defender's Office, the District Attorney's Office, and the community stakeholders who have worked to amend the language to meet the original intent. Joining me here today is Ms. Aisha Goins with Black Joy Consulting to explain the reasons why and the intention of the bill, and Ms. Kendra Berksey, Washoe County's Deputy Public Defender, who will walk you through the bill's conceptual amendments. And with your permission, Mr. Chair, I would like to turn the presentation over to them, starting with Ms. Aisha Goins, and she will have medical professionals testifying with her on the importance of this bill.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And I know you have your own duties today as far as chairing subcommittees, so don't feel obligated to stay with us for the bill hearing. I know you have some other folks who are more than capable of presenting the bill. So members, if the Assemblywoman has to drop off, that's because she's doing multiple jobs today. So thank you, Assemblywoman, and welcome Ms. Goins to the Assembly Judiciary Committee. I think this is the first time we've had you this session, and we'll give you a chance to go ahead and make your remarks, and then we'll go to the next presenter. So please proceed.
I appreciate your time, Assemblyman Yeager, Judiciary Chair, and also Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Marino for allowing me the opportunity to present this piece of policy. And so I'm driving on the 15th, headed to California for some much needed rest, enjoying the sunshine, thinking about what we're able to accomplish in the 80th legislative session. Excited about the folks that would be able to have their records sealed because of Assemblyman McCurdy's bill, AB 192, and the thousands of folks that would have their citizenship restored because of Speaker Friesen bill AB 431. I felt accomplished and proud of the legislatures and the state where I serve. I knew those bills would mean more work for the summer, but who cares? Because I'm about that work. Fast forward to May 25th, 2020, and we have all been quarantined for a little over 60 days. And like the rest of the world, I have time to watch social media. I'm scrolling on Facebook and I can see and feel the anger and the horror of my community. There is a video clip of an officer kneeling on an unarmed Black man. For 8 minutes and 46 seconds, this man asked, begged, and pleaded for his life. At one point, you can hear him calling for his mother, who had preceded him in death. George Floyd's last 8 minutes and 46 seconds will replay in my mind for the rest of my life. As I thought about this, I started thinking about all the Black juveniles in the current system, a system that is rooted in racism that Black people face every day. When I close my eyes at night, I can hear those juveniles' unanswered cries for their mothers. Who will answer them? CEIC, the Cannabis Equity and Inclusion Community, and I did not want another Black man's death to be in vain. The uprising was the battle cry for those of who love policy work. The organ I knew we needed to answer the call for our community. It was past time for reform. On August 5th, in the 31st Special Legislative Session, the Assembly and the state unanimously passed SCR 1, a proclamation that declared racism as a public health crisis. The first couple of paragraphs of that reads, whereas stated by Maya Angelou, prejudice is a burden that confuses the past, threatens the future, and renders the present inaccessible. And whereas systematic racism and structures of racial discrimination create generational poverty and perpetuate debilitating economic, educational, and health hardships and disproportionately affect people of color, causing the single most profound economic and social challenge facing Nevada. Those first two paragraphs is the reason why I called Assemblywoman Monroe Marino about AB 158. The 2019 Clark County Department of Juvenile Justice Services statistical report stated that possession was the #2 most referred offense to the juvenile court system, battery being #1. The report also said that 1,009 youths have been referred for possession of marijuana. And of those 1,009 youths, 459 of those were Black and Hispanic. The intent of AB 158 is to ensure fairness and equality in the justice system as it relates to possession of alcohol, tobacco, and cannabis. Juvenile persons under 21 to offer a second chance to those folks that may have just made a bad decision or may be in bad company. And to answer those cries to those young persons that are in the juvenile system that you may go home. I have two, I spoke to the committees and I met with each one. I was asked to have two representing people to talk on this. One of the assembly persons asked me for a doctor. So I have a pediatrician, Dr. Carmen Jones, on the line. And then someone else asked me for a licensed certified caseworker and a licensed drug and alcohol counselor. And Mr. Anthony Harris represents both of those. So if they would come on, Dr. Jones first.
Hey, thank you, Ms. Goins. I appreciate your remarks. And why don't we take it in that order? I think we do have both of them on the Zoom with us. So we'll go to Dr. Jones first and then Mr. Harris. So Dr. Jones, please go ahead.
Good morning, Chairman Yeager, and greetings to the entire committee. My name is Dr. Carmen Jones, and I am here as a core member of Cannabis Equity and Inclusion Community in support of AB 158. I am a formally trained pediatrician, nearing 30 years as a physician. I have worked in almost all sectors of my field. This includes practices in the private and public sector, in the inner city, suburban, rural, and hospital settings. Notably, I spent 3 years with the foster care system in Chicago and 4 years at Child Haven in Clark County. I was also the medical director for Hunt Ridge Teen Clinic here in Las Vegas for 7 years. Currently, I am practicing cannabis medicine and am pursuing a formal certification in this area so that I may be known as an endocannabinologist. Let me begin by stating that in no way am I here today to promote the use of cannabis or any other adult use or mind-altering substance, legal or illegal. My concern today and the reason for my appearance is that there are children, albeit adolescents up to 21, being held in detention after single incidents of cannabis possession. And while I understand that laws are made for a reason, I am concerned that there is inequity in how the current law is applied. We now understand, after statistics have been tabulated and stated previously, that Black and brown youth are 3 to 4 times as likely to be referred to detention than their white counterparts. I do not believe that those offenders of any color should be referred to detention. However, whether it be a child, adolescent, or even an adult being reprimanded into a holding facility is traumatic. I am certain that each of us here has an acquaintance, a family member, or perhaps even a personal experience with having been detained at least once. If you have ever listened to the account of that person, you know even if for the shortest amount of time, the entire experience suffered was traumatic. Now imagine that to be a child. Imagine that being a disenfranchised youth. Imagine that being a privileged adolescent or even a well-to-do adult. As you know, logically speaking, each brain will process that experience differently. However, even the most able adult will have suffered some form of trauma having undergone that indignity. I hope that you will consider the type of harm inflicted on these individuals. This includes everything from sheer embarrassment to serious and sustained trauma. This can include loss of potential financial gains and employment, additional insecurities within the home, mental instability, anxiety, depression, initiation of or continued drug use, and the revolving door of recidivism. And while I appreciate the fact that these laws exist to deter certain behaviors, again, I will submit that they are not being applied equally. As I understand it, a child or a youth who is caught with tobacco or alcohol are typically reprimanded but not detained. I believe cannabis violations should be treated the same way. In Nevada, because cannabis is available in terms of its use, is as available in terms of its use as is tobacco and alcohol, they should be punished more equitably. Children and adolescents should not be referred into a detention facility, and certainly not for a first offense. If the youth continues to get in trouble and has repeated offenses, I submit to you that it is because the youth most likely has a problem. The nature of this problem should be examined and evaluated. However, I disagree that it should be in the form of a drug or rehab facility, as you would not do that for a child violating the law with tobacco. I submit as well that a child or youth who continues this behavior may be better served by undergoing a psychological evaluation from a professional. As one of my senior colleagues who's been practicing medicine for well over 50 years, and I agree, stated, any child who repeatedly uses cannabis, despite the consequences, either has ADHD or PTSD that has been undiagnosed until proven otherwise. I am well aware that this is a belief, I'm well aware that this is a belief that has not been studied. However, I am also well aware that very few of my colleagues in pediatrics have extensive training or experience in cannabis medicine. It is because of that that I am here today on behalf of children and youth for which I continue to fight, as I have done for the last 30 plus years. Thank you for your attention this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Appreciate your testimony. We're going to go next to Mr. Harris. Please go ahead, sir.
Good morning to all the distinguished assembly persons represented here this morning. My name is Anthony Harris. I'm the founder and senior pastor of the Power Center Church in Las Vegas, Nevada, and a licensed clinical social worker and licensed alcohol and drug counselor also here in the great state of Nevada, as well as being a born and raised native of Las Vegas and a former 5-year resident of Reno, Nevada. I'm here to testify in support of revising the penalties for certain offenses involving alcohol and cannabis in Assembly Bill number 158. It is my professional opinion that the existing law punishing young people under the age of 21 for misdemeanor substance use offenses with imprisonment of up to 6 months and up to a $1,000 fine or even both is excessive and counterproductive to the development of these young people and to the Nevada communities as a whole. By modifying this law, several outcomes could result. A reduction of the school to prison pipeline for many of our Nevada children and teens, which adversely affects more minorities. A reduction of minority youth being jailed for minor substance abuse infractions. A reduction in the crime rate in Nevada. Our young people would get the help that they actually need for substance addiction or even for co-occurring disorders. and maybe even fiscally responsibility would result, as treatment is more cost-effective than incarceration. And several other benefits can also be named. As a pastor, community worker, and therapist, I have worked with many young people throughout the years who have made poor decisions concerning substance use and or possession of substances that have caused their futures to be in jeopardy. By changing these penalties to assistance, it will give those who truly have problems with substance use the opportunity to make things right within their lives, provide them the help that they need, and give them a chance to succeed. In my closing, it is my professional opinion that amending this law would benefit Nevada communities as a whole more than if the penalties of this current bill remain the same. Therefore, I am in support of the revision of Assembly Bill number 158. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you, and may God bless you all.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Appreciate your testimony. I believe next we have Ms. Birchie, and I see Mr. Pirro is on as well, and I assume that you two are going to take us through the amendments to the bill and talk a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of how it would work. And then after they're done, committee will have a chance to ask questions. So Ms. Birchie, I see that you're unmuting, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Yeager. The intention of the conceptual amendment is to assure that our criminal sanctions are proportional to the offense committed and to promote equity in our justice system. Amendment 1 of the conceptual amendment, it amends the statutes penalizing individuals aged 18 to 21 for using marijuana and alcohol. So this statute does not apply to adults 21 years of age and older. The conceptual amendment lays out the penalties for violating those statutes based on the number of times that an individual commits that offense. In drafting the amendment, the goals were to ensure that there is punishment because the individual did violate the law, but also not inject that person into the criminal justice system. We received a suggestion from the District Attorneys Association that we agree with. Some language will be forthcoming. We are still in discussion with them as to exactly what the punishment shall be. But instead of having graduated sanctions based on the number of offenses, there will be one uniform punishment. It could either be, as set forth in subsection A, a requirement of community service. In subsection B, we had added an additional of what we refer to as a victim impact panel, which is a community-based meeting for victims and witnesses to describe their experiences they or their loved ones had to endure due to the actions of drivers who were under the influence of a controlled substance, or having some other form of counseling as being a requirement. However, we do agree, and it's my understanding that the District Attorney's Office is supporting this as well, specifically with subsection D. So for any time someone then commits one of these offenses between the age of 18 and 21-year-old, there will be a process where the court will automatically seal their record. And this is arguably the most important portion of this subsection, is because it will ensure that for misdemeanor offenses, they'll all be sealed so that it will not show up on someone's record and will really provide that second chance for those individuals. For section 2 of the conceptual amendment, these are the changes for what is needed in order for it to apply to juveniles, so all those under the age of 18. In discussions regarding this section, it became extremely apparent that there is no uniform standard for how these offenses are being treated across Nevada. For example, Washoe County and Clark County are currently providing completely different sanctions, in part due to the different resources being available in Clark County that do not exist in Washoe County. What we are trying to do is combine the conceptual amendment that was provided by the District Attorney's Office to incorporate provisions of that work across the state of Nevada, just to ensure that there is equity. And what we've heard from some of the opposition is that they really want to codify resource programs that unfortunately only exist in one portion of the state. In that subsection, there's an amendment to NRS 62B.3201 and NRS 62B.332A. Those are primarily jurisdictional changes. Every crime is a delinquent act when it's committed by a juvenile, anyone under the age of 18. We are just bringing this in line with the alcohol and marijuana offenses, with the behaviors that are called status offenses, where it is not a crime, but it is an offense due to the age of the offender. For example, a status offense would be smoking cigarettes. It's not a crime for adults, but it is for those, for children. If you look at the district attorney's amendment, she references CHINS, CHINS. That is an action. It's the same thing. It's a civil proceeding used by the juvenile court to get a child to conform his or her behaviors to certain rules. CHIN stands for Child in Needs of Services. The last portion of the conceptual amendment creates a new section that would address how to sanction minors who use marijuana or alcohol. So we've created NRS 62C.080, and it lays out how those offenses should be treated. The first three sections mirror the language from statutes for other status offenses, specifically the use of tobacco. Since this is a similar offense, the framework should remain the same. In the proposed amendment from the district attorney's office, we will combine it with their suggestion to ensure that there's the requirement that a parent or guardian be notified. We agree with that suggestion. Then subsection 4 sets out the penalty or sanction for the violation. Section A is for a first offense. It allows for these charges to be treated informally and by a term of community services. When it's handled informally, that means that there's not a petition filed by the district attorney, and that this could be handled without it going on the child's record. This, for a second offense, it could also be conducted informally and have the requirement of community service, as well as the requirement of a substance abuse evaluation as recommended by Dr. Jones. Then for a third offense, it would allow for the district attorney to handle this formally or informally. We increase the term of community service and also includes the requirement for an evaluation. As I indicated, we're still in discussions with how exactly to phrase this so that it does work throughout the state of Nevada. So I appreciate the district attorney's office with their suggestions, and we look forward to working with them to ensure that we do provide a system that will work for everyone. These graduated sanctions take into account that perhaps a child for a first offense just made a small mistake and does not need to be involved in the system. But if they continue on in that process, more may need to be done to ensure that the conduct does not continue. I want to thank Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno and Aisha Goyens for their hard work in this bill to protect Nevada's youth and ensuring that they have a second chance. So with that, Chairman Yeager, with your permission, we are open and available to respond to questions from the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Birchie. I have a couple of just clarifying questions. I just want to make sure we have a good record in terms of where we are with the bill. So there are two amendments that are on Nellis. One, of course, was provided by the sponsor of the bill, and then we have one from the district attorney's office, which I believe contains the additional language in red, as well as crossing out some of the new green language, and certainly I'll let the district attorneys speak about their amendment. But if I heard your testimony correctly, with respect to the first part of the bill, the punishment for adults 18 to 21, it sounds like you're still working on coming up with what would be a uniform penalty. So even though the amendment says there's this graduated structure, it sounds like you're working on finding just one penalty no matter how many times the offense is committed. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chair Yeager and Kendra Birchie, for the record. And the reason for that is if we want to ensure that there is automatic sealing, and if there is, and if a charge has been automatically sealed, then it may not necessarily show up for the district attorney if this conduct were to persist. And so it does not make sense for their purposes to have a first offense and a second offense if the automatic sealing has occurred. And we all agree that especially for these still children aged 18 to 21, the purpose is really to have some punishment, but then also have that automatic sealing, which is why we'll create a sanction that would be just for an offense, regardless of the number of times it has been committed.
Thank you. And that certainly makes sense. I think committee members, as you can imagine, if a record's sealed, it's going to be hard to tell if it's somebody's first, second, or third. So that was a question that I had, but you have answered that. And then just for clarification as well, I know the juvenile side of this is perhaps a little bit more complicated. And I think, the intent, I believe, is to get folks help and treatment. So it sounds like that section that pertains to juveniles is still being worked on, exactly how the offense is going to be characterized, where exactly it might land in statute, but it sounds like there's a good dialogue happening and that everyone seems to agree on the concept. It's just a matter of how to put it into statute. Did I get that correctly as well?
Kendra Birchie, for the record, yes, Chair Yeager. That's exactly where the issues lies. If we want to make sure that we are providing the appropriate penalties and having it laid out appropriately in our statute so that we're allowing Clark County to handle the cases the way that they are, that's successful, as well as in other parts of the state.
Great, thank you. Committee members, we had a number of presenters on, and I want to give folks a chance to ask questions that you may have, either about the bill or from our other presenters who are kind of out in this field doing the work. So if you could give me a show of hands if anybody has a question. So I'm going to make some notes here. If you keep your hands up for just a second so I can jot down who's got questions so far. Okay, I think I might have everybody. So here's the order we're going to go in at the moment. We're going to start with Assemblyman Orenlicker, and then we'll go to Assemblyman O'Neill, Assemblywoman Krasner, Assemblywoman Hardy, and then we'll probably take some more after that. So please go ahead, Assemblyman Orenlicker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. David Orenlicker, for the record, Assembly District 20. And I'm just curious about why the police are involved at all. I remember when we were talking about a sale of tobacco products to minors a couple of weeks ago, one of the highlights was that the punishments were for the sellers, not the minors. But here we're talking about arresting minors, which seems like a public health problem. Our police are already overburdened with more serious crimes. This doesn't strike me as a crime. So why are we involving the police at all, arresting these minors for possession of a substance that I don't think they should be using, but that doesn't strike me as criminal?
Kendra Birchie, for the record, and Chair Yeager, through you to Assemblyman Orenlicker. I'll just add that I agree with you that police officers should not be arresting our juveniles for these offenses. It's my understanding that the way that it's set forth in the language, if we have it where there's that citation, then those in youth will not necessarily be arrested. The officer could provide them with a citation, so a notice to appear instead of arresting them. As if you see in subsection, the last section of the amendment in section 3, we discussed either a referral or a citation. So the way that cases are brought to the juvenile justice system could be by way of citation, with the officer writing out that complaint saying that an act had occurred, or they could be referred to the juvenile justice system. And so neither of those would require a arrest. However, I do agree with you, and I'll look into the statutes just to see if there's any language that we need to add to tighten that up.
May I follow up?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. David Orenlicker, Assembly District 20, for the record. While I did talk about arrest, and that is a problem, I don't want to suggest that that's the only concern. I don't think police should be citing kids. I think this is a serious issue. If you've got police taking some kind of enforcement action for a minor who's, not mature, making, yes, it's a bad decision, but I don't think we should view this as something for the criminal justice system to handle. Whether you do it by citation or any other means, it shouldn't be in the criminal justice system, is my point.
Thank you, Assemblyman. And I will note, I don't know if we have law enforcement with us today, but your concern is well taken. Generally, this is not something the police would arrest on. Typically, they'd give a citation when we're talking about an adult. I think that's usually what their preference is on misdemeanors, unless there's some reason to arrest. But certainly that's not going to satisfy your overall concern about criminal justice involvement. But I want to make sure the record was clear that it'd be pretty unusual for law enforcement to arrest on something like this, absent something else going on. So I'll just put that out there for the record. And let's move on to, we have a bunch of additional questions. We'll go next to Assemblyman O'Neill.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Barchi, I like your amendments, but I've got a couple questions and then a comment. First of all, you talk about the officer shall notify the parent or guardian of the child. You're going to describe the manner of how that, are they going to hold the child on the side of the street till the parent arrives? What's the procedure?
Kendra Birchie for the record, and Chair Yeager through you to Assemblyman O'Neill. That's actually the amendment that's provided by the district attorney's office. So I'll let them describe how exactly they see that going forward. We don't have currently in that amendment language saying that it's the police officer who shall notify the parent or guardian. And that's exactly what we're trying to work on, is see how we can craft the language so that we aren't necessarily detaining kids on the side of the street. So I appreciate your question.
And Assemblyman O'Neill, I believe we have Mr. Jones, who's going to be joining us on the phone, probably in testimony. So we'll have to hold that question.
Okay.
And hopefully he's listening and can be prepared to address that when he comes on. I just don't think I have the ability to get him on right this second. So
Okay.
Mr. Jones, if you're out there and listening, please note that question. And do you have another question or comment, Assemblyman?
It's just another comment. We talk about consumption of alcohol or possession of alcohol, but we don't state an amount. So the juvenile could have a 12-ounce can, or he could have a keg of beer. But we do talk about 1 ounce of marijuana, which equates to, depending, I guess, how you roll them, 30 to 60 joints. I see a discrepancy there. To me, the 1 ounce of marijuana is quite a bit. Just saying possession of alcohol is too broad of a statement. Any thoughts back from you, Ms. Barchi, on that?
Kendra Birchie for the record, Chair Yeager through you to the Assemblyman, Mr. O'Neill. I would just add that the purpose for the language with just possession and then the 1 ounce of marijuana is because that's how it's currently used in our legal system, where we've legalized less than 1 ounce of marijuana, and we've legalized just alcohol. So there isn't that distinction. And so that's the purpose for the wording of regarding alcohol and marijuana offenses.
But it's not legal to juveniles, is it?
No, it is. Sorry, Kendra Birchie for the record, Chair Yeager through to Assemblyman O'Neill. Correct. It is not legal for those under the age of 21.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's go next to Assemblywoman Hardy, please.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is, I was just wondering, in the original bill, it listed they would be referred to counseling or participation in an educational program or support group. And then the amendments both just say community service. So I was just wondering why the change in that. So if someone could address that, please.
Kendra Birchie for the record, through your Chair Yeager to Assemblywoman Hardy. That's exactly what we're working on in negotiations for the sanctions. For some individuals, just having a term of community service would be more appropriate than requiring them to go to counseling. For example, if someone just had a sip of alcohol, you don't necessarily need to interject them into counseling, because that could actually be more damaging and detrimental to them than just that term of community service, where they get that punishment, that their action has consequences. One of the suggestions had been to allow for a child to go to AA meetings. The reason why we're not including that, and want to make sure that's not part of this bill, is because we don't want children, potentially age 13 or 14, to be in these alcohol anonymous meetings with those who are 40 years old who've been engaged in using alcohol, marijuana, meth, anything like that. So to ensure that we're really targeting them. That's why in the conceptual amendment, we had discussed having them either receive that evaluation to ensure then that we know what is appropriate to require for that individual to do for counseling, or have them attend that victim impact panel, which will have them speak with victims of drunk driving incidences to really learn the consequences of continuing down that path.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate them trying to separate it out. Every child's different, every case is different. And so I appreciate that explanation. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Next up, we have Assemblywoman Krasner.
Thank you, Chair Yeager. Can you hear me? How's my audio? Good? Yeah.
We can hear you just fine.
Good. My question is for Assemblywoman Monroe Marino. First of all, thank you so much for bringing this bill. It's about time we give our youth in Nevada a real fresh start and a real second chance. And I was wondering if I could please be added on as a co-sponsor to the bill.
Yes, you may. And thank you.
Well, that might be the easiest question we're going to get all morning. So thank you, Assemblywoman Krasner. I have a question next from Assemblywoman Cohen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for the presentation. Ms. Gwen's mentioned at the beginning of her part of the presentation that possession is the second most referred crime, or I shouldn't say crime, right, because it's juvenile, so it's not crime, but it's the second most referred into the juvenile justice system. And my question is, do you know if that's done as a secondary offense, right? So what I'm saying is, because I might not be using the terms correctly, but are the juveniles being stopped because of the possession, or are they being stopped for something else and the officer gleans that there's possession, and so that's what the referral's coming from? Does that make sense?
Yes, and to Assemblyman Chair Yeager, to Assemblywoman Cohen, I want to just first state where those statistics come from. They come from the Clark County Juvenile Court System. Those are their 2019 statistics. Battery is the #1 offense, and marijuana possession is the #2 referred offense. So I hope that explains better, Assemblywoman Cohen.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. But what I'm getting at is, do we know if the officers are stopping them because of the possession, or they're stopping them for something else? Like there's a traffic infraction and the officer, smells the marijuana or sees glassy eyes and has cause to believe that there's possession, or something else is happening and the officer has reason to believe that there's possession, but the children weren't initially stopped because of the possession.
To Assemblyman Chair Yeager, to Assemblywoman Cohen, the statistics don't state that. The statistics just stated that the second offense was marijuana possession. It doesn't say if there was a stop or how the stop was. It just stated that there was an offense and that was the second offense and the statistics of it. My apologies.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Maybe if I can maybe get in touch with the Juvenile Public Defender's Office and see if they've got any indication on that. But thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. I think we need Assemblywoman Peters back here. She could probably help us wade through the data. Maybe we can get a database that is searchable. So I'd encourage you to ask that question. I suspect that nobody probably really has that data, but maybe we'll get lucky and maybe someone has that out there. So, and if anyone's on the phone line to testify and knows that information, please feel free to provide it when you testify. Okay, do I have further questions from committee members? If you could raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. I think I might. Okay, I see Assemblywoman Hanson stand by for just a moment. I think I might have everyone on one screen finally. Anyone other than Assemblywoman Hanson with a question? Okay, Assemblywoman Hanson, I think you're up.
Thank you, Chair Yeager. Thank you all for being here. Actually, here I go. It's not a question, it's a comment. I really have enjoyed my conversations before this bill came to a hearing today with Ms. Goins, with many individuals. It was very enlightening, and I'm so glad to see that I always say this, trying to find that balance between mercy and justice. And I think this bill really is really reflecting that. So I'm feeling encouraged that maybe the bill's getting to that point, and appreciate the amendments. And Ms. Goins, appreciate you taking some of my suggestions as well. And you know, kids need a chance. They make some stupid decisions, and we don't want them to have this haunt them for a lot of years. And I mentioned before in another hearing that we have trouble recruiting and getting people to go into law enforcement. You know, our young people could have an opportunity to have some great careers, and 85% of individuals can't pass the background check. And so I see this as a way to help our youth. They might make a bad choice, but then they can hopefully get on the right track, learn what these consequences are by being involved in a panel of victims or seeing what addictions can do, and then make a commitment to stay the course and instead of being penalized and having their record haunt them. So thank you so much to all of you for the work you're doing. I appreciate this bill greatly.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Any further questions before we go to testimony? Okay, I don't see further questions, so I want to thank all of you who presented and ask you to stand by for a moment. We'll have a chance for some concluding remarks after we go to testimony. At this time, I want to go to testimony in support of Assembly Bill 158. Mr. Pirro, I see that you're on the Zoom. Would you like to give testimony in support of Assembly Bill 158?
If I may, Chair Yeager, thank you. I appreciate it. John Pirro from the Clark County Public Defender's Office. The goal of this bill, I think, as you've heard, is to stop criminalizing kids for mistakes that they have made in their past, and a large majority of them will grow out of. And if we're all being honest, probably a large majority of us or people we know have grown out of. Juvenile attorneys for Clark County and Washoe and around the state are like holding Caulfield and The Catcher in the Rye. They're trying to catch children before they go off the cliff's edge and maintain their innocence. And this bill goes a long way towards doing that. Wayne County in Michigan has been doing this for 18 years to great results by finding that diverting kids out of the criminal justice system, even pre-arrest diversion, leads to less recidivism. So I'm glad and I'm thankful for Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Moreno for bringing this bill forward, Ms. Goins and the other presenters for presenting on this bill. And I humbly ask for this committee to pass this bill out.
Thank you, Mr. Pirro. And for the record, that was Mr. Pirro with the Clark County Public Defender's Office. I don't think we have anyone else on the Zoom in support, but if I'm wrong about that, just please unmute and let me know. I'm not seeing anyone. So BPS, let's go to the phone lines, please, and see if there's anyone there who'd like to give supportive testimony.
Thank you, Chair. For callers wishing to provide testimony in support of Assembly Bill 158, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. We will begin with caller with the last 3 digits of 695. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chairman Yeager, members of the committee. This is Holly Wellborn, HOLLYWELBORN, Policy Director for the ACLU of Nevada, testifying in support of AB 158. I want to thank Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno for bringing this important legislation. The struggle to protect youth from the harms associated with both drug use and drug prohibition has led to enforcement policies that disproportionately harm Black and Brown youth and funnel children into the school-to-prison pipeline. Zero tolerance policies have caused irreparable harm to communities of color and to society at large. While we have legalized cannabis use in this state, we have yet to fully correct the harmful impact of criminalization statutes that are peppered throughout the NRS. Several national studies show that states with cannabis legalization policies, they significantly decrease arrest rates for adults, but there is almost zero change to the arrest rate for youth. Whereas states that take the additional step to enact decriminalization policies, including policies with graduated sanctions or those that prevent detention, like the policy before you today, that significantly reduces the arrest rate for both adults and youth. No child under any circumstances should be held in detention on a marijuana offense. We are strongly in support of AB 158. We're happy to take any questions that the committee might have off the record and work to get this bill passed. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Wellborn. BPS, could we take the next caller, please?
Yes, thank you. Caller with the last three digits of 080. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, Jim Hoffman, Nevada Attorneys for Criminal Justice. We support the bill for the reasons that the many other presenters' testimony and support have given. I also wanted to speak to Assemblyman Orentlicher's comments. We share those goals. We frankly don't think this is something that the criminal justice system should be handling. We view this as a meaningful step in that direction. So again, we support it. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Hoffman. BPS, let's take the next caller, please.
Caller with the last three digits of 522.
Yes.
Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Sure. Good morning. Monique Jammer, MoniqueJammer, on behalf of the Las Vegas chapter of the National Bar Association. I want to first thank the Assembly Judiciary Committee and Chairman Yeager for allowing me to provide this testimony in support of Assembly Bill 158. First and foremost, the state of Nevada issued SCR 1, a resolution that urged public action and recognized racism as a public health crisis. Within that, it is urged that the Nevada communities and communities across the state create laws and regulations that can eradicate the racism and structures that create racial discrimination, from poverty and economics all the way through education. Here, Assembly Bill 158 seeks to address at least one aspect of the underlying institutional racism that has adversely affected the juvenile criminal justice system. Specifically, AB 158 assists with combating the high levels of criminalization. It focuses on minimizing the disproportionate prosecution of Black and Brown community members, which inevitably causes long-standing stains on their lives. It seeks to reduce the impact of disproportionate criminalization of these Black and Brown youths by prohibiting them from obtaining a substantial criminal record offense, and instead creating penalties and community service opportunities that can help rehabilitate them and help them to still create a future for themselves. Further, and I think most importantly, is the bill's focus on the fact that these individuals who are being arrested, charged, and ultimately prosecuted are children and youth who deserve to have their innocence protected, who deserve lessons over lockup, and who are worth investing in their education and their growth over their criminal records. As a former youth from a family of 7 Black children, with several siblings and members of my family who were victims of a broken criminal justice system at a very young age, I long to know how they would have turned out if there were bills like AB 158 and legislations passed and enrolled that created these opportunities for second chances over the traumatizing impact of a repeated incarceration system. The LVMDA believes that AB 158 addresses and will help mitigate some of these real-world consequences of the systemic and institutionalized racism that exists in the criminal justice system. And thus we urge that the Assembly Judiciary Committee support AB 158. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Jammer. BPS, let's take the next caller, please.
Next caller with the last three digits of 147. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Bridget Duffy, BRIGID-DUSSY. Good morning, Chair Yeager and members of the Assembly Judiciary. I'm happy to say this is my very first appearance in this legislative session. I originally listed myself in opposition as the bill originally came out. I was notified shortly before the hearing that the conceptual amendment that's put forth by the DA's Association is in consideration, and so I'm happily in support of AB 158. I know we still have some work to do on those amendments. Chair Yeager, thank you for stopping short of laughing at the conceptual amendments put in by the DA's Association. Those are actually just my handwritten scratch notes that were not meant to be public. So I appreciate that it is now public, but very crudely written. I would always, and you will always hear me come out and support, and for those who don't know me, I run the juvenile division for the Clark County DA's office, so I handle all of the juvenile delinquency matters. I was one of the founders of the Harbor in Clark County. I'm a proud supporter of diversionary programs that keep our children out of the juvenile justice system, because I know, as well as anybody else, once you get into the system, it is very difficult to get out. I have often talked about behaviors of children that are parenting issues, mental health issues, and then our delinquency issues. A lot of times, most of the time, children that are found with alcohol and marijuana are experimenting, and these are parenting issues, which is why notification to parents was important to me. I could answer, I know I only have 2 minutes, so I'm trying to figure out how to answer Assemblyman O'Neill's question about how police notification would work, or peace officer. So peace officer notification could be when the citation is routed to the juvenile probation office. They are peace officers and they could reach out to parents. Oftentimes our officers in the field will call parents and say, hey, you know, I have your son or daughter here. They were out in the field drinking. We just wanted you to know we issued a citation. We're sending them home. There are different ways, and I think it is something that needs to be worked out with our law enforcement partners. In Clark County, we have the Harbor. I want to make very clear, there is currently a sign on the door of juvenile detention, it has been for the last year, that says, do not bring us misdemeanors. There is no child in juvenile detention for possessing marijuana or being in possession of alcohol. We don't take misdemeanors outside of DUI and domestic violence. And domestic violence is only if it is determined that they need that 12-hour safety hold, cooling off period. And DUI would only be for processing into booking and then released with a court date. They're not necessarily detained, only brought into booking. But there is a sign, we don't take misdemeanors. That's why we have the harbors. We have children diverted out to those programs so that they can have assessments and referrals. They are not cookie cutter assessments. Not every child needs the same thing. Some children don't need anything at all. And we don't want to overtreat them, as had been mentioned before. Sometimes it's just, you know, I got caught and shoot, I feel terrible about it. And my mom and dad are, you know, taking away my cell phone and I'm never doing that again. So we don't need those children in the system. But I also don't want to miss an opportunity to have an assessment on a child who may have some real, true mental health issues, as I believe Dr. Jones mentioned, and we miss that opportunity before they start going deeper and deeper and deeper into addiction. So we have to be able to weigh that. And oftentimes we have parents who need help figuring out where to get those programs for their children. When they find out that their child's been using marijuana, they don't even know where to go. So sometimes there's that supportive service, which our assessment centers provide. I know there were plenty of other questions. One's about the referrals. They are referrals. So yes, we have the number of referrals, battery and possession of marijuana. That is not the cases we file. That is a very different statistic. Referrals are just, they are given a ticket, a citation, and they see a probation officer, or in Clark County, they go to the harbor. And sometimes they're not even given a ticket to go to the harbor. But it's not the cases we file. Those are very different in numbers. So I want to make sure that's very clear to you all. I know you don't often take questions on opposition or on support, but if you would like, I could stick around to answer any questions you may have, or you're free to reach out to me on this very important bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Duffy. We appreciate it, and I'm sure it won't be the last time you appear in front of the committee. It's a little difficult for us to do questions with phone callers, so I would ask if you have additional questions to just reach out to Ms. Duffy. If you need her contact information, we can certainly get that for you. So thank you again, Ms. Duffy. I gave you a little bit of extra time since there were a couple of questions that were really directed to you. BPS, could we at this time go to the next caller in support if we have somebody?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Next caller with the last three digits of 037. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Tanya Brown, TONJA BROWN, Advocates for the Inmates and the Innocent. We strongly support this bill and the conceptual amendment to this bill. I had some questions, but they've already been asked. So I just want to echo the comments made by Ms. Birchie, Mr. Pirro, Ms. Wellborn, and Assemblyman Orenlicker. We do support this. Thank you. Oh, I do have a question too. With the pandemic and the juveniles, I'm curious to find out how much the drug and alcohol will be on the rise compared to, say, last year in 2019, 20, and 21. Is there anything that's going to show anything that these juveniles are actually drinking and doing more drugs than previous years, and then say in 2 more years, and when this pandemic has settled down, and compare it with what's going on now? Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Brown, and I would encourage you to perhaps follow up with Ms. Duffy. She might have some of that statistical data that you're seeking, and of course, we don't have it for future years yet, but we will at some point. BPS, do we have any other callers in support?
Yes, caller with the last three digits of 648. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes to speak and may begin.
Good morning, Chair Yeager, members of the committee. My name is John Jones, John Jones, here on behalf of the Clark County District Attorney's Office. With the conceptual amendment, we are here in support of AB 158. I want to take the opportunity to thank Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, Ms. Goins, and Ms. Birchie for working with us on our concerns with this bill. As Ms. Duffy previously indicated, we appreciate your indulgence on our written amendment filed on Nellis. It was passed around as a starting point draft, but due to a time crunch, it became our formal amendment. And there are parts of our amendment that are not yet necessarily spelled out in the written amendment, but Chairman Yeager did a great job of sort of summarizing where we're at on our proposed changes. Our first proposed change is including some additional options for judges, including counseling and maybe victim impact panels. As Ms. Birchie indicated, one size does not necessarily fit all with respect to these juveniles. The second is tiered penalties, and I know it's doesn't quite make sense that we're asking to get rid of tiered penalties, but with the mandatory sealing provisions of these low-level offenses, when a case is sealed, DAs and law enforcement don't know that a person has had a first or second offense because we're not able to see it. People are surprised to hear that our offices can't see sealed cases, but that is in fact the reality. And because of this, the tiered penalties as currently proposed would be illusory, and our proposed amendment would treat all offenses as the same. And Ms. Duffy has already addressed the juvenile piece of our proposed amendment, and we would ask that you consider that as well. With that, Chairman Yeager, members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to speak in support, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Jones, and I want to thank you and Ms. Duffy for working with the sponsors. It sounds like we are on our way to a happy place, so I appreciate that work. BPS, do we have anybody else in support?
Yes, next caller with the last three digits of 173. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Yeager and members of the committee. My name is Madison Salabini, Madisen, Salabini, Saglibene. I'm the Executive Director for the Nevada State Chapter of NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. NORML is in full support of Assembly Bill 158. I especially want to thank Aisha Goins and Dr. Jones and the CEIC team for continuing to push this agenda. And thank you, Assemblywoman Monroe Marino, for crafting this legislation. I think it's pretty incredible how many co-sponsors jumped on this bill right away, and it's a really good indication of how far this bill is going to go. One of our favorite pieces of this bill is the fact that this misdemeanor offense would be sealed so that the youth would not be forever burdened with the collateral consequences that often come with, these offenses, obviously, along with simply assigning punishments that are far more suiting to the crime, helping to lessen recidivism, all that. The 2016 legalization initiative was referred to as Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol. So creating this alignment in treating cannabis crimes the same way we would treat those for alcohol just makes sense. Thank you so much for your time. We're looking forward to continuing to work with you all and CEIC to make sure that we get this right for these kids. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Salabini. BPS, do we have anyone else in support?
We are currently in support of Assembly Bill 158. If you have recently joined the call and would like to testify in support, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 087. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, or I'm sorry, good morning. Good morning, Chair and members of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. For the record, my name is Ariel Edwards, ARIELLEEDWARDS, and I am the Government Affairs Specialist for the City of North Las Vegas. We would like to state for the record that we are in support of AB 158. We'd like to thank Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Moreno and the presenters for bringing forward this important and timely piece of legislation forward. We appreciate that our children, especially those from Black, Indigenous communities of color, will receive the mental health services they need for first-time offenses. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Edwards. BPS, are there any other callers in support?
Yes, Chair. Caller with the last three digits of 759. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, my name is Jagada Chambers, Jagada Chambers, CHAMBERS. I'm calling in complete support of Assembly Bill 158. One caveat, I've been listening to the presentations. Thank you, Chair, as well as all the presenters. One caveat that I want to highlight is the referrals, the different titles of them, I'm not sure. But the reality is of the 1,009 possession of marijuana, 359 were Black youth and 444 were Latinx youth. So nearly 800 of those 1,009, whatever they are, citations, referrals, that contact with law enforcement in that judicial system, it is overly impacting Black and brown youth. So to give these youth a hope, I know that in 2015 there were only 247 possession charges for Black youth. That has ascended up nearly 45%, trending the wrong way in my eyes after it has been legalized in the state. So I just salute Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe-Marino for bringing this legislation forward, and I pray that it's able to pass and impact our youth in a positive way. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Chambers. BPS, let's take the next caller, please.
Thank you, Chair. Any further callers wishing to provide testimony in support of Assembly Bill 158, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no further callers for support at this time.
Thank you, BPS. I'm going to close support. I'll now open opposition testimony. Don't believe we have anyone joining us on the Zoom in opposition. BPS, please check the phone lines to see if there's somebody there who'd like to give testimony in opposition.
Yes, thank you. For callers wishing to provide testimony in opposition for Assembly Bill 158, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Callers wishing to testify in opposition for Assembly Bill 158, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, we do not have any callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you, BPS. I'll close opposition testimony. I will now open neutral testimony. We don't have anyone joining us on the Zoom in neutral as far as I know. BPS, let's check the phone lines to see if there's someone in neutral there.
Thank you, Chair. For callers wishing to testify in neutral of Assembly Bill 158, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Callers wishing to provide neutral testimony for Assembly Bill 158, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Thank you, BPS. Appreciate your help in managing the phone lines as always. I'll now close neutral testimony. Before we go to closing statements, I wanted to hand it over to Assemblyman Miller, who I believe had a question.
Thank you, Chair Yeager. I just wanted to thank Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe-Marino for bringing the bill forward, and Aisha Lawrence for working on it with all the stakeholders to get it, looks like it's going to get to a place that we can all agree on. I initially thought that I had signed on to this bill. I believe I did. However, there can sometimes be some confusion between myself and Assemblywoman Brittany Miller because of our last names. So I just want to make sure that I can be added to this bill as a sponsor throughout the amendment process. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the bill. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblyman. And 1 second, committee. All right, great. So having that behind us, I'm now going to go to back to Assemblywoman Monroe-Marino, who I believe has some concluding remarks on Assembly Bill 158. And Assemblywoman, you can let us know if you are the only one making concluding remarks or whether others might want to give them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I believe I will be the only one making concluding remarks. I'd like to thank you and your committee and everyone who has been working with us on this piece of legislation and considering AB 158. I believe collectively we agree that children are just that. They are children, and we have an obligation to meet them where they are, to hold them accountable for their actions while giving them the necessary tools to learn from their mistakes and assist them in becoming healthy, productive, successful adults. And I urge your support for Assembly Bill 158. And yes, Mr. Miller, I would gladly add you as a co-sponsor, and Assemblywoman Hanson reached out to me, and I would be proud to have you as an additional co-sponsor on this bill. I urge this committee's support for AB 158. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assemblywoman, and I want to thank our other presenters who joined us on the call today. Really appreciate your work on this issue, and Ms. Goins in particular. I think you had a chance to make it around to, if not all, almost all of the members before the committee hearing. As chair, I really appreciate that because I think it helps answer a lot of questions before the hearing so we can get through all these bills that we have. So just want to say thank you to all of you who spent about an hour of your time with us this morning, but obviously spent way more time than that preparing for this morning. So we certainly appreciate it and hope you have a great rest of your day. And at this point, I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 158, and we'll now go to the second bill on the agenda, but our final one for hearing this morning. I will open the hearing on Assembly Bill 157. Assembly Bill 157 authorizes a person who is a victim of certain discriminatory conduct relating to an incident involving a peace officer to bring a civil action under certain circumstances. That is a mouthful for a bill draft request description. We have Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno back with us to present this bill, and I think she'll be solo on this one. So welcome back to the Assembly Judiciary Committee, Assemblywoman, and please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for having me back. I promise this one will be much shorter. For the record, I am Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Moreno, representing Assembly District 1. I'm here today to present for your consideration Assembly Bill 157, which addresses a serious problem that has recently gained national recognition. It's the discriminatory use of false 911 emergency calls against certain groups, especially communities of color. This bill represents an effort to call attention to the problem and provide a legal remedy to victims of this discriminatory practice. As pointed out in the whereas clauses beginning on page 2 of the bill, recent national news stories in 2020 drew the attention of state legislatures across the nation to false 911 calls when the intent was to harass a person or a group of persons because of their inherent characteristics, including their race, gender, nationality, religion, disability, or sexual orientation. Many specific occurrences went viral on social media, and incidents like the bird watcher in Central Park asking the woman to put her dog on a leash were recorded and gained national attention during a weekly news cycle. As is often the case, the media exposure led to more and more of these types of cases coming to light. I think we can all agree that at the very least, these occurrences represent a misuse of our law enforcement personnel, wasting their time and taxpayer resources. More importantly, they cause serious mental and even at times physical harm to the victims of such incidents. This sense of harm extends to the community as a whole, to communities of color, and to our judiciary and law enforcement communities as well. The social harm of such incidents splits the fabric of our society and contributes to the distrust of government generally and law enforcement specifically. We need to find ways to rebuild trust. I believe that AB 157 can be a part of that effort. I would like to note that similar bills have already passed in New York, Oregon, and Washington. In fact, the sponsor of the Oregon bill, a fellow legislator, encountered the very type of incident this bill will address. Oregon State Representative Jonelle Bynum, who is a Black woman, walks her district like most of us do, going door to door to talk to voters. She takes notes about constituents' concerns on her phone as she goes along, as many of us do. 2 years ago, a resident in a mostly white neighborhood in her district found her campaigning to be so suspicious that she called the police. I think you can see why we need to address this matter. Mr. Chair, at this point, I would like to review the highlights of Assembly Bill 157. bill aims to address these deliberate, false, and discriminatory reports by providing the victims of such reports with a specific, effective, and targeted remedy. The form of this relief is the ability to bring a civil action for damages against persons making such reports. Section 1 of the bill begins on page 3. It defines the circumstances under which a person can bring such an action. With regard to the person making the false report, the report must knowingly cause a peace officer to arrive at a location and to contact the person being discriminated against. Subsection 1 identifies the discriminatory conduct and defines the specific type of harm and outcomes that would allow for civil action under the bill. Subsection 2 lists the potential forms of damages along with the costs and fees that may be recovered by the person prevailing in the suit. The remaining subsections authorize the action under the bill even if related criminal convictions already exist and provide for other technical matters. It is important to note that in no way does this bill or the actions of this bill apply to public employees performing their normal course of duties. And with that, I will stand for questions from the committee.
Thank you for your presentation, Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno. Committee members, do we have questions on Assembly Bill 157? If you can keep your hands up. I see we have Assemblyman Wheeler out the gate. Are there any other members? So we have Assemblyman Wheeler, Assemblywoman Cohen. Anybody else with questions at the moment? You'll have a chance to ask them afterwards. So we'll start, we'll go in that order. We'll start with Assemblyman Wheeler. Please go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Assemblywoman, I remember that a few years ago, and I think it's still going on today, probably just not being as reported as much, there was a practice called swatting out there, where someone would call, SWAT and say that there's a barricaded suspect or whatever, and thought it was pretty funny, and people were actually dying. But the way I read this would, like an incident like that, if the person were the victim of the swatting were not of color, would they be allowed to sue? I'm just using that as a specific example. I mean, it could be in any other things as well. But would they be able to sue the person that called the officers out? Or is this strictly for people of color?
Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Moreno, for the record, to you, Mr. Chair, through you to Assemblyman Wheeler. This bill, Assembly Bill 157, does not neglect the actions of the swatting bill, I believe from the 2017 legislative session that was passed. But this bill specifically speaks to false reports to police based on a person's race, sexual orientation, gender, religion. And in my conversations with law enforcement, they specifically ask, could this be stacked on other charges? So yes, you could be charged with the swatting crime and AB 157.
Okay, so maybe I just used a bad example. I'm sorry. Someone's called out just, because a person is walking down the street and they don't like that person. Would that strictly be for the categories that we have listed in the bill here, or for literally everyone?
It would be specifically for the categories listed in the bill. As a former law enforcement officer myself, I remember being in a courtroom and a judge saying from the dais that it is not a crime to be walking while black. But what we've seen in recent media coverage, that it's the Black community that has brought attention, but next week it could be someone different. As we've gone through the COVID pandemic, we've heard stories of members of our AAPI community being targeted specifically because they're AAPI and for no other reason. Does that answer your question?
I Think so, yeah. So there's some neighborhoods in Los Angeles where I grew up, for instance, where it's definitely a crime to be walking while white. So so I'm assuming this would cover that too, because it's not that specific. So thank you very much.
Correct.
And I'll jump in for just a second, if I may. I want to note for committee members that this bill creates a civil right of action. So, in order to proceed under this bill, if a case went all the way to a jury trial, that you'd have to prove that it's more likely than not that the person making the call did so with the intent to, and then we have that list of A, B, C, and D that are in Section 1. So a jury would have to find that that was the reason for the call, was to essentially violate one of those 4 provisions for someone to be held liable. And of course, you would have all your normal discovery, depositions, evidence, witnesses, and then the jury would make that determination. So hopefully that's helpful for the members of the committee that don't practice civil law or criminal law.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome, Assemblyman. We'll go next to Assemblywoman Cohen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Assemblywoman Moreno, for bringing this bill. My question has to do with in Section 2. Section 1, Sub 2, the damages that can be collected. Where or does reimbursement for attorneys fall into that? Because if someone's been the victim of this and the police come out, oftentimes that person has to get a criminal attorney. There are civil attorneys dealing not just with the case, but if the situation garners a lot of press, oftentimes they hire attorneys. So is that encompassed in the bill?
Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Moreno, through Chair Yeager to Assemblywoman Cohen. Yes, as you look in subsection 2 of section 1, and item C says the cost and reasonable attorney fees incurred in bringing the action. So it is the intention, my intention, being a former law enforcement officer, I don't see jail. Our jails are far overcrowded. And I find that if a person is made to be held accountable financially for their actions, they may not do that again. So it's $1,000 damages to the victim, the cost of the attorney's fees that the victim would incur, but also the cost to law enforcement responding agencies for having to respond to a false call. That's taking our law enforcement officers away from true crimes being committed in our community. So I believe section 1, subsection 2, point C addresses that.
So, and thank you for that. I did see that. I'm talking about in a broader sense of the attorneys they have to hire. If they have to hire a criminal attorney, because charges are pressed against them that often later the charges are dropped, but the person who's the victim in this situation often does have to hire a criminal attorney before the charges are dropped. And then again, beyond dealing with the lawsuit, they have to hire a civil attorney to deal with dealing with the press, that type of thing, if the situation does come out in the press. I mean, we know this happens constantly and it's not always in the press, but that's what I'm getting at, that beyond hiring an attorney for this case, would this law help them recoup those costs?
I believe it will. I'm not a criminal defense attorney, nor am I a civil attorney. However, I believe in a civil court action, the judge could award the victim the reasonable cost to cover all attorney's fees associated with the incident, both on the criminal and the civil side.
Okay.
But I would defer to a civil attorney for that opinion.
Yeah, I don't quite.
I can jump in, Assemblywoman Cohen. I am not a cat. I am a civil attorney, so everyone knows. I think it would be covered under that subsection 1 under compensatory damages. I would think if you could prove that, the call caused you to have to hire a criminal attorney to defend yourself against something that wasn't legitimate. I think that provision would be broad enough for a judge to award those costs if you had to actually hire your own attorney.
Oh, okay, thank you, Chair. So that goes beyond emotional distress of hiring a counselor, that type of thing. So, okay, just as long as we've got that covered. Thanks.
You are welcome. And I think the way that it's drafted indicates that it talks about compensatory damages, including without limitation emotional distress. So we unfortunately don't have legal with us here today. Mr. Wilkinson is busy drafting bills that we are eagerly awaiting, but I think it's worded in such a way that it just wanted to specify that it would certainly include emotional distress damages, but would also include everything else that we might be able to prove under your basic compensatory damages.
Thank you.
Let's see if we have additional questions. If you could raise your hand if you have a question. So we'll go next to Assemblywoman Hanson.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with my microphone today. Thank you, Chair, for the question. And it actually is a question this time, folks. It's not just comments. Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, in section 1, let's see, where was it? I lost my place. B, cause the person to feel harassed, humiliated, or embarrassed. And then also, I think I have a question about the D section as well. In a civil case, and maybe this question is for legal or for our chair, since he practices in civil, I'm wondering how subjective that language is. Like, how do we prove feel harassed, humiliated, or embarrassed? What kind of standard is that in order to prove it?
Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Moreno, through you, Chair Yeager, to Assemblywoman Hanson. Feelings, I agree with you, are hard to quantify. However, the harass, the humiliation, and embarrassment, there was another case of the false 911. There were a group of gentlemen working out in the gym in their luxury apartment complex. There were other people in the gym, and one resident didn't recognize them, although one of the gentlemen had lived there over a year, called the police. This is a gentleman, a businessman, who was embarrassed to be have the police called him in front of his people that he lived with. He was subsequently detained, which takes you down to D, which impacted his income from that day, and had to have a discussion with his employer of why he was detained, talked to by the police department. He was harassed, he felt humiliated and embarrassed, but it also impacted him, his economic status with pay and his reputation with his employer. So while I wish we had an attorney that could put this in legal jargon, that's how I see, that's how I interpret the bill. Does that help in answering the question?
Giving the example, yes, I can understand it. I just worry that the language is such that I just am wondering. I've served on juries before, and trying to prove that a feeling. Certainly, if there's witnesses, if there's video, things like that, I'm sure would help. But I just had some concern about the broadness or the subjective nature of that section in particular. But thank you for illustrating the example.
And I'll jump in too, just to sort of address that. I think to the extent a case like this went to trial, in front of a jury, there would likely be a jury instruction that the parties would agree on, and the judge would deliver that would explain how a jury is to decide that, and probably flesh out in a little bit more detail what those terms would mean. So I would expect that to happen as well. But of course, we don't have it in statute yet. So if we pass this bill and one of these goes to trial, we'll have to stay tuned and see how that works out. But normally in those situations when there's terms that could be vague in some sort, the parties and the judge will usually give some further instruction to the jury, or the jury could come back and say, we don't understand what we're supposed to do. What do these terms mean? And then they could give supplemental jury instructions. Do we have other questions for Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno? I'm not seeing any additional questions at this time. So Assemblywoman, thank you for presenting. We'll ask you to stand by for a moment as we potentially take testimony on the bill. I will now open it up for testimony in support. I don't see anyone on the Zoom in support. BPS, could we, or actually I take that back. We have Ms. Birchie on the Zoom. Thank you for turning your camera on. If you'd like to offer supportive testimony, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Yeager. Kendra Birchie with the Washoe County Public Defender's Office for the record. We appreciate Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno for bringing this bill. I've had clients who've been subjected to this form of harassment, and it has led to significant issues, not just criminal, but emotional, and more importantly, distrust in our legal system because they felt invisible to what should have been protections of our legal system. We support AB 157. It protects the safety of our citizens from harassment and unfortunate horrific situations that we have seen across the country just because they were engaging in everyday activities. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Birchie. Okay, now I don't think we have anybody else in the Zoom in support. BPS, could we check the phone lines to see if there's anyone who'd like to give supportive testimony there?
Thank you, Chair. For callers wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 157, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. And we will begin with caller with the last 3 digits of 080. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, Jim Hoffman, Nevada Attorneys for Criminal Justice. We support this bill for the reasons that Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno stated and also that Ms. Birchie stated. Again, we support it. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Hoffman. BPS, are there any other callers in support?
Caller with the last 3 digits of 611. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chairman Yeager and members of the committee. This is John Pirro from the Clark County Public Defender's Office. We'd like to thank Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Moreno for bringing this bill forward and finding a remedy for discriminatory conduct that I think it's high time both Nevada and the United States at large starts to reckon with. So we appreciate her bringing this bill forward and we are in support. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Pirro. BPS, do we have other callers in support?
Caller with the last 3 digits of 130. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and you may begin.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Christine Saunders. That's CHRISTINE SAUNDERS, and I'm the Policy Director with Progressive Leadership Alliance in Nevada, here in support of Assembly Bill 157. We have seen through recent viral videos and for many decades, including cases like Emmett Till, where false accusations can lead to great harm and even death, especially for Black people and people of color. This bill creates stronger accountability for people who use the police with ill intentions. We ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Saunders. BPS, is there anybody else in support on the phone?
Caller with the last 3 digits of 956. Caller, please
Good
slowly
morning.
state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair. For the record, this is Liz Davenport, Lizdavenport, the legislative extern with the ACLU of Nevada. We support this bill and echo previous support testimony. Law enforcement has unfortunately been hijacked by prejudiced people placing biased 911 calls that lead to terrible consequences for the innocent victims. As Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno mentioned, this was prominently evidenced this past summer with Amy Cooper. Similar stories abound, such as in 2018 when a young man in a North Carolina breakfast restaurant was subject to homophobic slurs by the employees, who then called the police, which resulted in the police arresting and choking the young man, who was a victim of homophobic slurs and Black. By enacting a civil penalty for calling police to harass and carry out the caller's racial prejudice, it will give these victims a way to recover from the mental and physical trauma these police encounters cause. Beyond embarrassment, humiliation, and feelings of degradation and profiling, the encounters can result in physical trauma as well. There is no good reason to not provide people with rights. AB 157 gives these victims a way to recover for the trauma caused by the police encounter spurred by the prejudiced callers. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Davenport. BPS, do we have anyone else in support?
Caller with the last three digits of 087. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes to speak and may begin. Caller with the last three digits of 087, you may begin. I'm sorry, Chair, we're having some problems with that caller. We will go on to the next caller with the last three digits of 037. Caller with the last three digits of 037, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Tanya Brown, TONJABROWN, advocates for the inmates and the innocent. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. We strongly support this bill, and we echo all the comments made in support of this bill. I do have some questions about this bill. For an example, I do know of someone who is gay. His brother does not approve of his lifestyle. They both have an elderly mother. Now, the brother has used everything he could possibly do to keep his brother from ever seeing his mother. And in fact, having him arrested, the guy going to jail, having a restraining order filed against him, and then wind up getting supervised visits in order to see his mother. And then towards the end of his mother's life, and she passed away in the last couple of months. So he never got to see her. He put a stop to it. So would this bill apply to the family members? And also, if the brother, who is gay, turns around and sues his brother, who is the heir or the executor of the estate, how would that apply to this bill? Would the estate be put on hold pending civil litigation? So I just kind of wanted to bring that forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Brown. BPS, are there any other callers in support?
Caller with the last three digits of 898. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes. It may begin.
My name is Annette Magnus, ANNETTEMAGNUS, and I am the Executive Director of Battleborn Progress. We are in strong support of Assembly Bill 157. Prejudice and racism exist, and we have seen that on full display this past year. And those that use police as a weapon to express that racism should be held accountable for their actions. As a white woman, I often see people who look just like me do the most damage using these tactics. Very real damage is caused when a person of color has the police called on them simply for who they are or because a white person uses their privilege to do harm. When a white person threatens to call the police or actually calls the police on a person of color when they have done nothing wrong, they are damaging this person, taking away their dignity and weaponizing the police for their racist intentions. We have seen examples of this behavior play out in real time all across the country. And when I see it happen, it disgusts me every time. This type of behavior should not be tolerated in Nevada and has no place in our communities. Do the right thing and support AB 157. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Magnus. BPS, is there anybody else in support?
Next caller with the last three digits of 556, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Anne Marie Grant, ANNEMARIEGRANT. I just want to echo the other callers' testimonies. I fully support the bill. It can be extremely traumatizing for people to have the police utilized against them. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Grant. BPS, do we have any other callers?
For any callers wishing to provide testimony in support of Assembly Bill 157, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 087. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
I'm going to do a quick sound check. Chair Yeager, can you hear me this time?
I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. This is Jared Luke, Government Affairs Director for the City of North Las Vegas, JAREDLUKE. I apologize for earlier. There was a sound mess up, but we could not let this meeting continue without showing our support to Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, the other primary sponsors and co-sponsors of AB 157. As the state's largest majority city, we could not let this meeting continue without throwing our support behind this important piece of legislation. Thank you for your time, committee.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Luke, and thank you for your patience as we work through some of the technical glitches that we sometimes have on the phone line. We're happy you were able to join us and make your comments. BPS, is there anybody else on the line in support?
Any callers wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 157, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Callers wishing to provide testimony in support of Assembly Bill 157, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no further callers in support at this time.
Thank you, BPS. I will close testimony in support. I will now open testimony in opposition. We don't have anyone with us on the Zoom in opposition. BPS, could we check the phone line to see if there's anybody there who would like to testify in opposition?
Thank you, Chair. For callers wishing to testify in opposition, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 787. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Is that which caller?
Go ahead, caller.
I'm not sure if you called me or not. My name is Marjorie Malik, M-A-R-J-O-R-I-E, last name M-A-L-L-E-C-K. And thank you for allowing me to speak about AB 157. I don't have a well-prepared speech, but I'm currently in a situation that would possibly be affected by this bill. I'm currently being abused by a large group of criminals, and some of them are in the protected category that this bill talks about. This bill is being presented because there is a publicized incident where a woman gave false information to a police officer, and that incident was widely publicized. It seems like this event was publicized in order that bills like this would be brought forward later. And it also seems like this bill was tailored to my situation. I think the real purpose of this bill is to silence potential accusers and not to help falsely accused people. I feel this bill sets up a dangerous situation for most people and will abrogate the rights of myself and other people. The most important function of the government is to protect the population. This bill is meant to prevent victims from calling the police and explaining their situation unless they already have substantial evidence to prove their claim. For example, in sexual assault that does not involve DNA evidence, there are usually no witnesses, no videotape, no evidence. And so these people would not be able to call the police. A lot of rape victims would not be able to call the police. They would need to remain silent for fear that their abuser could sue them later if their abuser falls into one of the protected categories, and if they have the financial resources to hire an attorney. And even if the abuser were a white male, if he were to claim to be a member of the LGBTQ community, he would be able to sue. Under this law, Bill Cosby would never have been brought to justice. We all know that it's easier to get a verdict in a civil suit than in a criminal trial, as evidenced by the O.J. Simpson trial. I know that the Central Park Karen incident was widely publicized and that many black and brown people fear having the police called under a false pretense. But I think the numbers of false accusations of black and brown people by white people or white women is probably very small and not significant. All the anecdotal evidence that was given today, there were no numbers, no statistics. I think the numbers of women who may need...
Ma'am, could you please begin wrapping up? We're over 3 minutes at this point.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't know. Okay, the numbers of women who may need help from the police is very high, and the number of these situations may involve people that fall into protected categories. So this law would hurt many more people than it would help. And I also believe this law is not constitutional. I understand why, police would support it. That would be less work for them. Attorneys would support it, more work for them. My father was an attorney. And the other thing I want to say about bringing up situations like Emmett Till was a horrible situation, but it happened in 1955, 6 years before I was born. My children say I'm, too old to care about. And, Emmett Till is, not something that I think would happen today. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Ms. Malik. BPS, is there anybody else on the phone in opposition?
We are in opposition of Assembly Bill 157. If you have recently joined the call and would like to testify in opposition, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Callers wishing to provide testimony in opposition of Assembly Bill 157, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no further callers for opposition at this time.
Thank you, BPS. I'll close opposition testimony. I will now open neutral testimony. We don't have anyone with us on the Zoom in neutral. BPS, is there anyone on the phone line who'd like to give neutral testimony?
For callers wishing to provide testimony in neutral, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Callers wishing to provide testimony in neutral of Assembly Bill 157, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. We will go with caller user 1. Caller, please slowly.
Good morning, Chair
state and
Yeager
spell
and
your
members
name.
of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. My name is Alex Ortiz, representing Clark County, ALEX-ORTIZ. Clark County is neutral on Assembly Bill 157 as written. I just want to thank the sponsor for meeting with us and talking about some of our concerns, which she did mention during her presentation this morning. And we wish and thank her for taking and considering those comments that we provided to her. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Ortiz. And now we know who the mysterious user 1 is. So when we see you in a future call, we'll know that is you, Mr. Ortiz. Nice to have you back in the committee. BPS, any other callers in neutral on Assembly Bill 157?
Callers wishing to provide testimony in neutral of Assembly Bill 157, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. And Chair, the public line is open and working. However, there are no more callers at this time.
Thank you, BPS. Appreciate your work as always in helping us navigate the phone lines. I'm going to close neutral testimony. Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, before any concluding remarks, one thing I noticed and I wanted to kind of flush out a little bit on the record while we still had you here. If you look at the bill, the bill is just one section, but if you look at subsection 3, it indicates that a person could bring a civil action even if the person had been convicted. I guess it says regardless of whether the person had been convicted of a crime or not. And so I'm just trying to get your intent on the record that, there are obviously legitimate reasons why people would call law enforcement. I think we heard from some of those in the opposition testimony, of course. And then there are, perhaps not legitimate reasons. And so I just want to get sort of your thoughts on whether this bill is intended to allow somebody who is ultimately arrested and detained, perhaps convicted, perhaps not, by an officer who obviously might feel humiliated or embarrassed because of that situation, but whether that would allow them to come back and sue the person who called, if there really was, I guess, a reason for law enforcement to actually arrest, detain, potentially charge in a scenario. And hopefully that question wasn't too lawyerly.
Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Moreno, for the record. No, that question was not too lawyerly. If there was just cause for the call to be made to law enforcement, then there would not be a remedy for the call that was made. This bill is specifically for the false calls that were motivated with the intent to cause harm while knowing that there had not been a crime committed.
Thank you for that response. And certainly for anyone watching, if you believe you have been a victim of a crime, you should certainly contact the authorities. This bill should not dissuade you from doing that. And that was in line with how I read the bill, Assemblywoman. So I thank you for that clarifying remark. Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong, I think you had your hand up. No, okay. So there's a pass there. So Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, I'll give you a chance to make concluding remarks on Assembly Bill 157.
Thank you, Chair Yeager and committee members for considering Assembly Bill and hearing Assembly Bill 157. I believe that we have a moral imperative to do whatever we can as policymakers to stop this type of behavior. At a minimum, it wastes the time and resources of law enforcement. At its worst, it's an attempt to weaponize our law enforcement personnel against the communities that they serve. And I urge your support of Assembly Bill 157.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno. Thank you for spending some time with us here this morning in Assembly Judiciary. I will now close the hearing on Assembly Bill 157. That brings us to our final item on the agenda, and that is public comment. By way of reminder, we'll allow up to 30 minutes of public comment at the end of each meeting. Callers will have 2 minutes to provide public comment. BPS, could we go to the phone to see if there's anybody there who'd like to give public comment this morning?
Yes, thank you, Chair. For callers wishing to provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. We will begin with caller with the last 3 digits of 556. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Anne Marie Grant, ANNEMARIE sister of Thomas Purdy, who was killed by Reno police, hogtied for 40 minutes and then asphyxiated to death by Washoe County Sheriff's Office. Today, I'd like to read a letter that was written by Terry Colgrove, the mother of 27-year-old Kenneth Stafford, who was killed by Sparks Police and Reno Police on July 11th, 2013. My son, SPC Kenneth J. Stafford, was being treated for PTSD at his duty station, Joint Base Lewis McChord in Fort Lewis, Washington. He came home with his family on leave around the 4th of July, which was the 1-year anniversary of his brother-in-law's murder that police still haven't solved. They are trying to say it was gang-related because of the area he lived in and the people he hung out with. My son and his family were pulled over a couple times in the first week they were home and harassed by RPD because they were in an area and the cops knew who they were. Then with the Trayvon Martin case and the fireworks, my son kept getting angrier and angrier. I have never seen him so angry in his life. I didn't know what PTSD was until he came home and I looked it up, only because I asked his wife what was going on and she told me about it, but she said she didn't know what it was either. Here she is living with him and seeing the changes in him, and she did not know what it was. He was in contact with his doctor for the first week here, and things weren't as bad as the last few days of his life. Then his phone broke, and he couldn't call his doctor anymore. Prior to that, he was calling him 4 to 5 times a day. On the morning he was killed, he had been up for 72 hours and was getting paranoid. He asked me for a gun. I told him I didn't own one, and he asked me why he needed one. He said he wanted it for protection. I called the VA hospital to try to get help. Because they told me he wasn't in his system, we needed to bring him to the police or call the police. I called his wife, who called 911. He didn't threaten her with a gun. He just showed it to her, and she freaked out, screaming and got mad. The Washoe County Sheriff's Office was handling the investigation. I showed up at the scene, and I was told that Kenny had asked for a cigarette. As I tried to hand the cigarette to the police officer, and less than 30 seconds later, I heard gunshots. They killed Kenny. He was shot multiple times. I believe it was over 15 times. The officer, Shane Minnick from Sparks PD, went on to kill another community member less than 3 years later. Please do not support bills that protect bad police. Please support bills that promote transparency and accountability. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment, Ms. Grant. BPS, are there other callers on the public comment line?
Caller with the last 3 digits of 787. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
This is a question, not a comment. This is Marjorie Malik, MARJORIE MALLECK. What is a situation where you don't have, if someone calls 911 because they're in immediate danger, but they don't have proof of that danger? I mean, that's the situation where this bill will cause harm to the victim and not to the would cause harm to the person making the call, which would actually be the victim. And I think statistics ought to be shown, to prove that this is an issue, because I think if you look at the statistics, on
Ms.
both
Malik,
sides.
Ms. Malik, can I? We have closed the bill hearing on Assembly Bill 157. This is public comment. So if you have public comment that doesn't relate directly to the bill we heard, that now would be the appropriate time for that, as we're no longer in the bill hearing.
All right. Well, that's what I thought the last caller was talking about. But All right. Well, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. BPS, do we have anyone else on the public comment line?
Any callers wishing to provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working. However, there are no more callers at this time.
Thank you, BPS. As always, appreciate your hard work in making these meetings a reality for so many people, regardless of whether they may be, wherever they may be in the state. And I think we have folks that sometimes call in from out of state. So thank you for the work that you are doing. I'm going to close public comment at this time. Before we talk about the rest of the week, anything else from committee members this morning? Well, good news is we made it through Wednesday, so we're more than halfway there towards the end of the week. Thank you, committee members, and it was a pretty long meeting getting through 3 bills this morning. I appreciate your attention, your questions. In terms of where we go from here tomorrow, we just have 1 bill on the agenda, but it is a bill that deals with the eviction process, so I anticipate that bill is going to take us a bit of time to get through, so we'll be starting at 8 o'clock. And then Friday, likewise, we'll be starting at 8 o'clock as well with a couple of bills on the agenda. I don't yet have an update on what next week is going to look like, but hopefully I'll have an update for all of you either tomorrow or on Friday. So I hope all of you have a really great rest of the day, and I'll see you all tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. This meeting is adjourned.